Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of TEDXcellence, the show that I continually subject myself to because I am bored out of my skull. That's why. That's the only reason I do this. No, but, I do it to learn something, I think. Maybe. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I'll finally learn something. I don't know. In the absence of PBS, I am a public broadcasting system. Isn't that interesting? Oh, the times we live in. But regardless, I come to you live from my Corona bunker on the moon with Dogcat Fox, a Pepperjack, and all of you. And before the stream began, thank you, tall person. Hoy, y'all. Happy National Mint Julep Day. That's a drink consisting primarily of bourbon sugar, water, crushed or shaved ice, and fresh mint. Well, technically I've got the bourbon part down. The rest is all Dr. Pepper. But who all has shown up today to join me on this educational journey? Well, it's Raziel, hello. Tall person, of course, hello. Chicago Mike, hello. The Luke Skywalker 2, hello. ARM UK, hello. Hi, Scribe, hope you're having a nice day. It's really hot where I am. I hope you can cool down soon, because being really hot is my least favorite way of being. My way of looking, though, it's just naturally the case. Maniac Man 2030, hello. Quinn the Cultist, hello. Old Guy Gamer, hello. Humble Clay, hello. That One Servant of Satania, hello. Graf Spree, hello. Keeverdam, hello. Zaublay, hello. Becca Fairley, hello. Angela Ariaga, hello. Officer Buck Tudd Russell, hello. And thank you so much. Hello, Portal Penciler? You mean my porthole? Or Portal Pen... Okay, Spittle Buggies, hello. The gayest person on YouTube, hello. This is Kyle, hello. Asian Hippie, hello. Professor Chaos, hello. All right, so what do we have on the plate for today, guys? Well, I'll tell you, this is a complete mystery box to me. I have just about no idea what this is about. I was more intrigued by the title and the sort of, contradiction of notion in the title. I'll get to that in a second. Let's see, Soraya, hello, and thank you. Havoc Vladimirovich Stalinov. Something in Russian that I can't pronounce. Scribbles, can't stick around. I'm watching the Dragon launch, but have some Pepperjack money. Thank you so much, Havoc. I hope the Dragon launch commences, because last I heard the weather was threatening to cancel it again. So fingers crossed on the one hand that it goes, and fingers crossed secondly that everything goes well. So that being said, so what is the title of today's presentation? Why did it grab my attention? Well, let me read you the official title. And I might have given it away in the overlay of the video, but all the same. Reforming criminal justice without changing the law. And you see the inherent sort of, verbal contradiction there is reforming in the absence of change. And so that's the part that I'm most curious about. So this might actually be interesting, because I am curious to hear what the pitch is. How do you reform criminal justice without changing the law? Now, I know what some of you veterans might be thinking. This may end up being another restorative justice sales pitch. And it might be, but I have no preconceived idea of whether that's the case or not. So if it ends up being so, so be it. Not the plan. I just came across a bunch of TEDx's that had to do with criminal justice in the last round or two. So if it does end up being restorative justice, I'll be curious to know how he intends to implement it without making it mandatory by changing the law. So we'll see how that goes. Sar Jim, hello. Deck Tran, hello. Dark Allow, hello. Loki Lycan, hello. John Miller, hello. Rack 3D, hello. Havoc says, yeah, weather ain't looking too good. Later on, I'll catch this on the rerun. All right, well, good. Like I say, best of luck to the astronauts. Best of luck to the mission. And hopefully everything goes well. All right, guys. Oh, Crimson Tiger, hello. Hope my power stays on for this. Well, I hope so, too. It's been a little iffy here today. We'll see. Because, heat and power lines don't always mix, as I think we've learned in the past. So, that all being said, here we go. Oh, yeah, and I forgot, because, I'm so hyped up. Sound check. Tell me if you can hear this, and then we'll proceed. Play, silly video.
So if you've been paying attention to the news lately, then you've likely seen that Congress and the president did something mind-boggling for Washington, D.C.
Ooh, okay, mind-boggling for Washington, D.C. All right. I don't know. What did Congress and the president do that was mind-boggling for Washington, D.C.? Works fine, says Rack3D. It's decent, says Kiever Dam. Sound check okay, says Humble Clay. Okay. Well, I as always, I tried to boost the sound a bit and take out some of the background noise, so hopefully it's clear. And, yeah. All right. What's this guy's name? Jordan Richardson? No idea who he is. Hopefully he'll tell us.
They came together to pass sweeping reforms to the criminal justice system.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, Congress itself has such a bad reputation for gridlock and inaction that one poll found that Americans had a higher opinion of traffic jams and Nickelback than they did of Congress. And I'm not quite sure which is worse.
Are you really not sure which is worse, traffic jams or Nickelback? Oh, well, everybody knows the answer to that question. But okay, so the president and Congress reform criminal justice in Washington, D.C. All right.
But despite a reputation for partisanship and divide, both sides of the political aisle in Washington, D.C. put aside their differences at the end of 2018 to pass the First Step Act, a bill designed to give inmates training and education while they're in prison so they can be better prepared to reenter society.
All right. Well, on its face, that sounds productive, hopefully. That is also changing the law. But we haven't gotten there yet. Thank you, Toxic Nightshade. The hubby agrees with your moonbase idea. Who wouldn't agree with my moonbase idea? Moonbase is a solution to so many problems. Moonbase will be a unified effort of all nations to come together to work to achieve a technological masterpiece, the dividends of which will improve all of our lives. Because the effort needed to make Moonbase happen and to make Moonbase sustainable will result in a plethora of advancements in science, in culture, in technology that'll benefit everybody. Moonbase is a true good. Vote Scribe 2020.
Now, given the fact that 95% of current prisoners will at some point be released back into their neighborhoods and back into their communities, criminal justice reform is not just good for politics, it's good for public safety.
Conceivably, it depends on what the reform is and how it plays out over time, but just saying it broadly like criminal justice reform is good, no, criminal justice reform is reform. The good is, subjective over time, conceivably, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
We should all celebrate giving a second chance to those who are ready to improve their lives, because we know that the revolving door of recidivism can be shut when we set inmates up for success. Okay.
In spirit, I agree with that. I don't think, and it all depends on the crime, of course, I don't think anyone should be doomed forever on the basis of a mistake that they have, or mistake and or bad choice that they have served their time for. After you have served your time and given your debt to paid your debt to society, so to speak, it shouldn't be an inherent you are doomed forever. I don't believe that is necessarily so or should be so. I think every opportunity within reason should be provided someone to have the tools necessary to make better choices. Nothing should be handed to them per se. Once they're out, they're on their own. They got to make their own way. But setting them up, if I can talk today, boy, the pepper jacks are taking an effect. Setting them up for failure immediately upon release is not a good idea. It doesn't help anybody. Giving them the ability to make better choices and then letting them take that initiative is a good idea. Okay, as however bumblingly as I said that.
But achievements like the First Step Act while inspiring and crucial to fix our broken criminal justice system, are the exception in federal lawmaking, not the rule.
Sure.
On average, every year in Congress, 10,000 bills are introduced, but only 4% actually ever become law. The last time a major federal criminal justice bill that made sweeping changes to the criminal justice system was actually passed was in 2010 with the Fair Sentencing Act. Again in 2007 with the Second Chance Act. And on a more negative note, the 1994 crime bill, which imposed harsh penalties and contributed to over-incarceration.
Okay, so you're going backwards. Well, as a matter of general principle, I'm not jazzed about sweeping change happening quickly. The whole idea, or at least one of the ideas behind the process, the House, the Senate, the President, so on, Supreme Court, having that deliberation split up amongst a multitude of people and institutions and so on is to, the hope is that you take deliberative time to figure out how to do things correctly, that there's debate, that there's refinement, that there's testing against previous law, and so on. You don't want to do sweeping change all the time on a whim, because usually, if that's happening, it's based on emotion. It's based on circumstances of the moment and not circumstances in the long term. So if he's arguing that we should have quicker change and more sweeping change more often, probably not agreeing with that one.
It's clear from this trend that although lawmakers are willing to introduce good bills, the odds are actually higher for any member of this audience to hit a hole-in-one in golf than for sweeping changes to the criminal justice reform, that the criminal justice system actually be passed.
Like I said.
Now, as someone who works for a policy advocacy organization, it is my job to help pass legislation to remove barriers of opportunity for all people, especially the least advantaged. Passing bills and working with lawmakers is a vital element to reform.
Yes.
And I'm by no means minimizing the need to enact additional reforms.
Are you going to minimize the need for careful, methodical, deliberate process in crafting legislation as an advocate for such? You do see the utility to that, I hope. Thank you, Chicago Mike. I'm ready for this with a Cuba Libre and a Cohiba rum and Coke and a cigar. Oh, you got the cigar this time, because I didn't know what a Cuba Libre was, because I'm not a real experienced drinker. Well, at this point, maybe a little bit. But okay, if you're ready for this, I'm ready for this, even though I don't know what this is quite yet.
In many ways, legislation is the best option to create lasting change for all Americans. But something I've come to realize is this. It's the greatest potential for change in the criminal justice system is not always found in the halls of Congress. Instead, it is found in the decisions we make every day without deliberation.
Every day without deliberation? Like choosing not to commit crimes? that kind of choice, maybe? That kind of decision?
The types of decisions that have met with intention and a vision for a better future could improve the criminal justice system. Let me give you one major problem that needs to be addressed.
Give me specifics, finally. As compared to the last TEDx talk where the guy talked in grand generalities and never gave us specifics. Tell me a problem that needs to be solved, and then tell me what your solution is to solve that problem.
Overcriminalization.
Overcriminalization. What does that mean?
A huge part of the problem in the United States is that we tend to lock up too many people for too long.
Too many people for too long. Why is it too many? And why is it too long? And what specifically are you talking about? Are all of those people not having committed crimes that necessitate incarceration? If not, why not? Or I should say, if so, why? You know what I mean.
The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the entire world, even when you compare it to other developed nations.
Sure, because we have a fairly low bar for violation of other people's rights and freedoms and property and so on. I don't know that I necessarily want to compare our level of civil discourse next to those of third world nations and say that somehow we're deficient. It's kind of an odd way to try to compare things.
We have 2.3 million people in prison or jail, and we pay $80 billion every year to maintain the system.
Mm-hmm.
In 1980, the federal prison population was at 25,000 people. That number today is just under 200,000.
Okay.
In 1980, the combined total of all 50 state prisons in America had 500,000 people.
Uh-huh.
Today, that number is at 1.3 million.
Okay, so the argument's going to be that our criminal justice reforms since the 80s have increased the amount of criminality or resulted in more people being convicted. Well, again, is that inherently a bad thing? I don't know.
So how on earth did we get here?
Let me guess, criminal justice reform or the crime bill of 1994?
The answer lies in part with a default preference to continually pass new laws criminalizing behavior.
Okay.
You know, if you're a lawmaker, it's much easier to pass a crime than to repeal one.
Yes. So what the argument is that laws passed that criminalize behavior, those aren't actually crimes or shouldn't be crimes. I mean, if we're going to talk about like the drug war, all right. I mean, I'm all for legalizing marijuana. I think it is as dangerous as alcohol or cigarettes or whatever else. It should be taxed. It should be regulated. A lot of states are doing that right now, one way, shape, or form, and the world hasn't fallen apart. So there's a lot of argument that you could make to me that I would probably agree with about legalizing and or regulating certain things that are currently stacking the deck as far as jail sentences and crimes and all sorts of convictions that deal with low-level drug offenses and so on. I'd be an easy sell on some of that. But are these crimes that are being passed as crimes, thus not crimes?
It's easier to be tough on crime than it is to be lenient. And with every crisis in our country, there's a push from the public and lawmakers to do something.
Yeah.
And very often, the type of thing that looks the boldest is to pass new crimes.
Pass new crimes? You mean pass new laws to prevent crime or disincentivize crime? Pass new crimes. Just conjure new crimes out of thin air. Okay.
This trend has caused an explosion in the criminal code.
Uh-huh.
So in 1790.
1790. I don't even know where he's going, except we're going back to history. Okay, 1790. Tell me, like, I mean, what wasn't the Constitution ratified in 1789? So, okay, right after the Constitution was fully ratified. Please do tell me what's relevant now.
There were only 17 federal crimes.
Really? In 1790? The year after the Constitution was wow! It's only 17? Golly gee whiz. Okay, and?
Today that number is 5,000.
Oh my God! You mean times have changed? Things have advanced? Technology, population, refinement of law, the Supreme Court, legal precedent over the course of 210 years? Wow, only 17 to 5,000 in 210 years. Damn, dude, that's a problem. Are you wanting to go back to 17 federal offenses? Please don't tell me that you're advocating for a return to 17 federal offenses.
But that doesn't count the over 300,000 regulations that carry a criminal penalty.
Uh-huh.
But you know what? This is only a best guess. Because no one, not even the Department of Justice, has been able to come up with a complete list of how many crimes are on the books.
Uh-huh.
The official answer to this question is, we don't know.
Is this guy pitching that we decriminalize back to 1790 standards.
Now, when the crimes in the books are paired with harsh sentencing and mandatory minimums, it should be no surprise that arrest and incarceration rates are going to increase.
Okay, now on the subject of mandatory minimums and or, sort of tied to that to a certain degree, depending on where you are, 3 strikes laws. Yeah, I'm not necessarily a fan of those. There should be judicial discretion in a lot of instances. It shouldn't be like, I committed 2 felonies and then I stole a bicycle and now I get a life sentence, which I think is actually a true story, or at least conjures up several true stories. So yeah, just set, this is what happens no matter what. Don't take into account any other factors. What's the point of having a jury? What's the point of having a judge if it's just this is it? Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to every situation. Just want to make that plain. But having it set in stone no matter what, without any judicial discretion in certain cases from, say, non-murder / rape felonies downward kind of thing. And I'm not a legal expert, so don't quote me on that per se, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I can agree that mandatory minimums aren't necessarily the best option in the world.
The crimes on the federal level have been mirrored in the states, where local crimes duplicate federal ones, and vice versa.
Yeah, because kidnapping is a crime, whether it's local or federal. And I know that's an extreme example, but doing something on a federal level, why wouldn't it then also be a violation of someone's rights or safety or something else on a local level?
In Alabama, barbering without a license is a misdemeanor crime. Punishable by 90 days in jail.
Okay. How many barbering without a license convictions have happened in the last, I'll just say 10 years. Tell me at least that.
In California, unauthorized possession of a commercial bakery basket is punishable by 6 months in jail.
Okay, if you're arguing for reviewing laws and statutes on the local level to find antiquated or irrelevant or silly laws that have just lasted the test of time because nobody bothered to repeal them, okay. But, I mean, is somebody going to actually arrest somebody for barbering without a license or bakery basket violation? Oh boy. Thank you, John Miller. So he is implicating all crimes are the same. Bull. Yeah, that's something I wanted to bring up. He's talking about crimes like there's one monolithic singularity when it doesn't work like that. And of course, his first examples, specific crimes, are the most silly. The kinds that you hear in some kind of trivia book or something. Did you know it's still illegal to take a bath outside in Mississippi? Or something like that, Come on, man.
In Florida, lobbyists from the interior design industry convinced legislators to pass a law declaring that anyone who practices interior design without a license should be punished by up to 1 year in prison.
And how many people have been sentenced to jail because of practicing interior design without a license? I agree, it's silly. You got a bunch of people that are lobbying to protect their industry from poachers or something, sort of like unions and so on. But do tell, how often has that law actually been brought into practice?
You better watch out before you rearrange your furniture.
You still haven't answered the question. What is the point of bringing this up? You want to repeal silly laws? Have at it. I don't have a problem with that. But how often do those laws actually affect people? And by the way, if the title of this presentation is Reforming Criminal Justice Without Changing the Law, then why are you even dwelling on existing law?
And as absurd as these laws can seem, the rise of overcriminalization has led to severe consequences. Ordinary behavior has now become subject to criminal enforcement,
Okay, how many people have been arrested for barbering without a license? How many people have been arrested and jailed for interior design without a license? Do tell. These are your premier examples. When it finally got down to specificity, those were the ones you brought up. So if they are a problem, you need to tell us how big a problem they are.
When most Americans would never suspect that their actions were against the law.
Uh-huh.
Let me give you a few examples.
Okay, more examples. By all means, go ahead.
In 2014, Arnold Abbott, a 90-year-old World War II veteran, tried to feed the homeless in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Okay.
Arnold ran a charity called Love Thy Neighbor, which provided free meals to those in need.
Okay.
Now, during the time of Arnold's service to the community, Fort Lauderdale passed an ordinance which placed restrictions on feeding the homeless.
Okay.
And Arnold believed that in order to comply with those strict regulations, he would have to shut down his charity.
Okay.
He did not see that as an option he could live with.
All right.
As Arnold put it, any human has the right to help his fellow man.
Sure.
So, Arnold continued to give free meals to those in need.
All right.
But instead of being applauded for doing an act of public service, Arnold was charged with violating that city ordinance and faced a potential punishment of 60 days in jail.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue against civil disobedience over a potentially ridiculous law. I mean, I don't know the details of the law, but taking our speaker at his word, yeah, it seems kind of silly that you'd end up being punished for feeding a hungry person. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs, but again, benefit of the doubt here. So, what happened to Arnold?
For feeding the homeless.
Yes, what happened?
Fortunately for Arnold, media attention caused the city to back down and dismiss the charges.
So, nothing happened.
But the damage of the new law that imposed criminal penalties had already been done.
Okay, how?
Instead of upholding a moral understanding of the criminal law, the urge to use criminal enforcement to solve an ordinance issue almost ended by jailing a 90-year-old World War II veteran who posed no threat to public safety.
Almost. Didn't. Is that law still on the books? How often has it been enforced? Who's been penalized for it? I don't know the rationale behind the law being passed, but here's the thing. If it's on the books, if it's a law and you break the law, whether or not you'll be punished or how you'll be punished is a matter for the courts. That's the process. It doesn't always seem fair in the, first instances of it, but that's how it goes. What was that? Here's the other question, and I know he's not going to answer this, but was that the first test of the law? Was that the first instance of somebody being held to account for that ordinance, for that law? And in the first test of that law, the violator was let go, charges dismissed, even though he broke the law. So does that law actually have any teeth? Isn't that more, not to be too dramatic about it, but a success for the process than an inherent failing of the process?
A similar incident happened in 2017 in Washington, D.C.
Holy cats, Maniac. Thank you so much, Maniac. The pepper jacks got my eyeballs. Manic, thank you so much. With the dog cat fox in a samurai outfit with a number 1 flag. I don't think I've seen that one before, but thank you, Manic. Not Maniac, Manic. Oh boy. Between the presentation and the pepper jack, my brain is just 3 steps away from where it should be. Thank you so much.
Now, if you've ever visited Washington, D.C. during the summer.
Actually, I have.
The heat and the humidity are going to make you immediately get out your phone, go on Zillow, and see how quickly can I buy an igloo in Alaska.
Well, I went at a time before cell phones. I was very young, but sure, it's uncomfortable. I'll agree with that.
That is how hot it gets.
Yes.
And so knowing how bad the heat was, 3 teenage boys decided to sell water bottles to anyone who's going to be walking from the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument.
Okay.
It came as a shock to them when they were handcuffed by the United States Park Police for illegally selling water. Instead of simply warning these young men that they needed to go through proper channels, the police detained and handcuffed these aspiring entrepreneurs who had opened the modern-day form of a lemonade stand.
Okay, a little over-dramatic there in your language, but all right, yes, a bit of an extreme reaction to a couple of kids selling water bottles, if that is the entirety of the story. And again, I'll take his word for it. All right, I agree with you. Overreaction.
Well, let's ask ourselves, why did drastic action like that get escalated to such a level?
Because there are laws and the people are paid to enforce those laws, even if sometimes they seem silly or beyond the scope, or who knows? Now, were these kids jailed? Were they fined? Are you going to tell us the rest of the story?
Because Washington, D.C. had established criminal penalties for unlicensed vendors.
Okay, so unbeknownst to them, they were breaking the law. Okay.
Including punishment by 90 days in jail.
So did those teenagers get 90 days in jail?
When the tools for criminal enforcement are provided by the legislature in federal, state, or local government, we should not be surprised when negative outcomes occur.
Did those teenagers get jailed for 90 days?
And while many of these incidents did not actually result in incarceration,
so those teenagers were not jailed for 90 days and thus were not incarcerated, just like the old man in Florida. So the examples you brought up so far did not actually add to the over-incarceration that you were complaining about earlier. That whatever momentary or temporary inconvenience their detainment may have been, just or unjust, no matter how you look at it, it was brief and resulted in no incarceration. Okay.
The fact of an arrest or charge can be a permanent stain on an individual's record, preventing them from succeeding in their education or their career.
The old man's charges were dismissed. What happened to the teenagers? Why aren't you telling us what happened to the teenagers?
So what can be done?
I don't know, but if you're going to say something other than changing the law, you've completely eradicated the title of your own presentation.
The first thing to do is to stop the bleeding. Whether it is Congress, a state legislature, or a city council, policymakers should pause the creation of new crimes and evaluate whether any new proposed law is actually needed.
Okay, so all current laws, even the frivolous and, over punitive ones that you've mentioned, should just stay on the books. Okay.
In the rare instance of life where some part of our society has not already been regulated, policymakers should carefully consider whether civil penalties instead of jail time is a better option.
Oh, okay. So potentially maiming someone financially is preferable. Okay. So isn't that changing the law, though? By making something that would be a criminal violation a civil violation? Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Not every undesirable conduct needs to be handled with the force of criminal law.
Okay.
And perhaps the best option is to consider whether inaction is the best response.
Inaction. Not like deliberative, like whether or not to enforce or take the circumstances into account. A couple of teenagers selling water bottles versus some guy selling, I don't know, T-shirts and memorabilia in a stand where he shouldn't or something. Okay, tell me about inaction. And also, and just like restorative justice, and I know he hasn't mentioned that yet, maybe he won't. But if there is a level of criminality on downward that you want to see re-examined or reassessed, please, and I'm just saying this out into the ether, please state that up front. Because when you talk about crime, it brings in a whole lot of possibilities. If you're talking about city ordinances or low-level misdemeanors on down and so on, then just say so. And I might be able to get on board with you depending on what you're talking about. But when you say crime and you say incarceration, I can't help but include things like theft and assault and murder and fraud and so on and so on. So far, he's mentioned very local level, minor, or inconsequential violations. But he hasn't specified that that's only what he's talking about. That always causes a little bit of a mental block for me when I listen to these things.
Not every malady of life needs a new law to fix the problem.
I agree.
You know, it's counterinstinctual for those of us in the policy world to urge lawmakers to not pass crimes.
Pass crimes. I keep getting caught on that phrase. Pass crimes. I mean, maybe it's technically true. It's just such an odd turn of phrase.
But given the rapid growth of our criminal code and the real-world consequences that they have on Americans from all walks of life, shutting down bad laws can actually be a tremendous step forward to fixing problems in the criminal justice system.
And we obviously have no mechanisms in our system for shutting down and or challenging bad laws. What are you doing to challenge the bad law in Florida that put that 90-year-old man at risk for doing charity? What are you doing to challenge that Washington, D.C. law that almost put teenagers in jail for 90 days for selling water bottles? I mean, you're pretending as though there is no process by which you could challenge or try to reverse laws in our system. And I'm not saying that it's easy. But then it shouldn't be. Because just because you disagree with a law doesn't inherently mean that law is invalid or wrong or unnecessary. I mean, looking at something that was passed in 1872, yeah, maybe it's a little silly. It's illegal to take a bath on a Sunday outside on your lawn. That's a city ordinance. Yeah, okay, that might be able to go. How often does it come up? But how often is it enforced? But, sure, that can go. But there's a process. It's a slow, deliberative process. It's not always fun. It's not usually fast, and sometimes it's not even fair. But anyway, I could go on. Thank you, John Miller. Pass laws. Crimes are breaking laws. Yeah, I know. Passing crimes. And
I've talked so far mostly about the proliferation of new crimes, but there are many more areas that are ripe for reform that can take place without ever changing the law.
Okay. Finally, almost 10 minutes into this, he's getting to the meat of the title of the presentation. All right. Tell me how to reform criminal justice without changing the law. That's why I'm here. That is the only reason I showed up.
Take, for instance, police and community relations.
And given the current events of the day, and for those of you listening in the future, we are just a few days out from the beginning of the riots over the George Floyd death. If you're listening to this in the distant future, you'll have to look that up. But okay, this is more relevant now than it was back in 2019 when this was recorded. So do tell.
It is crucial that law enforcement can work to keep the public safe while building trust.
I agree.
And long before anyone comes and sits in a prison or sits in a courtroom, they're going to be interacting with the front line of the criminal justice system.
More likely than not, yes.
The police.
Yes.
And this responsibility brings enormous power.
Yes.
So how can the police contribute to reform?
I don't know. How can the police make people decide not to commit crimes? Because usually if you're interacting with the police, 9 times out of 10, it's because they are investigating a crime or responding to a possible crime.
One of the easiest ways to do is the hard work of becoming familiar with the communities in which they serve.
So local cops are not familiar with the communities in which they serve. Got it.
A recent study by the Police Foundation found that when officers switched from driving around their patrol cars in certain neighborhoods and instead conducted foot patrols, 60% of the community groups believed that it increased the legitimacy of the police and trust.
Okay, so going back to a walking the beat model. Okay, now I'm not a police officer. I've got police officers in my family. I don't know the answer to this, but okay, I don't see anything inherently wrong with the idea. Is this to say that this is not practiced anywhere? That all police are always in cars? I honestly don't know. I don't know if walking the beat, foot patrols are still a standard in most major cities or not, or major neighborhoods. So, okay, I don't disagree with such a change in policy.
And as one person in the study explained, what happens is, instead of looking at them as the police, you see them as humans who are trained to help, assist, and protect you. So it's not just the police. It's our police officer who knows my block and who knows that's a dark street, and they're going to be there.
Okay, like I say, on principle, I don't disagree with that notion. I'm not sure that it is as rare an instance or an occurrence as this guy is suggesting, but like I say, I don't agree with the notion.
Making small decisions to build community trust can have an outsized impact, and it restores faith in the criminal justice system.
Okay. Granted, stipulated. You got me.
Prosecutors can also make an important change without ever waiting for a new law to pass.
Okay.
Already, district attorneys across the United States are wisely using their discretion about how they make charging decisions. So instead of charging a first-time non-violent drug offender with a felony, which can have lasting damage to a person's chance of gaining employment, prosecutors can evaluate whether a misdemeanor charge makes better sense and serves justice.
So far as I know, prosecutors have had that discretion the entire time. Should they just make a blanket mandatory, if this is your first offense, you're fine, misdemeanor, and not charged criminally or with a felony or something? I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding this guy. He's suggesting things that aren't being done anywhere at any time. These are new ideas. There aren't foot patrols in major neighborhoods right now. That prosecutors have not used their discretion based on the details of a particular case to decide on a misdemeanor versus a felony. Or is he saying this should be the rule? And if he's saying that this should be the rule, that kind of goes against the whole idea of not changing the law. So what exactly is he suggesting?
Even further, prosecutors can also recommend defendants to diversion programs or drug courts, avoiding incarceration altogether.
Yes, they can do that, and they have that option in many jurisdictions. I've seen a couple of documentaries on the subject. So you're pushing at an open door for more options and more discretion, because as far as I know, those options already exist. So again, unless you're advocating for those to become mandatory decisions, everything is as you are asking for it to be. And by all means, if somebody in the chat or later on in the future in the comments has something to correct me on that point, I'm more than happy to be corrected. But as far as I understand it, he's not suggesting anything revolutionary here. Thank you, Professor Chaos. It's called community-oriented policing or problem-oriented policing, and the DOJ has grants for police departments doing it. Yeah, I mean, not to sound like an old fogey, but does anybody remember the Police Academy movie, Citizens on Patrol? Do you remember that movie? You remember the concept behind that movie? taking in people from the community to become police officers because they knew the community, they knew the neighborhoods, they knew the people and the situations in there. They had on-the-ground, lifelong experience to help fight crime. I know it is the most ridiculous example, but as a kid, it stuck with me as a concept, if not as a film. This is not new. This is not something that isn't being done. So, as melodramatic as it is for me to ask this question, what are you talking about?
In this way, the costly method of relying on jails and prisons is reduced, while public safety is increased.
How? Again, unless you are saying you want to make these, I don't know, diminishments of punishment mandatory, then the discretion is and has been in the hands of the prosecutors this entire time. Community policing, foot patrols have been in place since the dawn of the police system. If you're not saying you want to make those things required, i.e. mandatory, i.e. new law, then what are you talking about?
By improving and focusing on the underlying condition of addiction or giving mercy for youthful mistakes.
And that never happens? What?
Prosecutors have vast power and resources at their disposal.
Yes.
And it can be used to reform the criminal justice system if thoughtful, wise decisions are made about how to ensure accountability and not just punishment for its own sake.
No. Wait. A prosecutor's discretion is ingrained in the criminal justice system. It doesn't reform the criminal justice system. It works within the boundaries of the criminal justice system as it is. Now, if you want to say that the boundaries within the prosecutor's work are somehow inhibiting of real justice, as in like mandatory minimums and so on, hey, I might be on the same page with you. But using a discretion as a prosecutor or as a judge is not reforming the system. It's working in the system. Am I on a different planet here? Have I completely misunderstood what he's been saying here? Because I'll make this confession since we're talking criminal justice. I may or may not lean occasionally on the pepper jack to give myself an out if I've misheard or misunderstood something from a speaker on a TEDx talk, because it's entirely possible. I have been caught legitimately many times in the past by people who have come back to a video I've done and said, you totally misinterpreted what that person said, or they did not say what you said they said because you misheard them or something else. And I've been burned for it legitimately. And I appreciate the corrections. I don't mind being called out on a mistake. I don't like living on mistakes. But in this instance, am I wrong in like being completely bewildered as to what he's getting at? Working within the boundaries of prosecutorial discretion or judicial discretion does not inherently reform the criminal justice system. It may change a law. It may set a new precedent that is argued later on in a challenge to the law, certainly. It could be part of reformation, but it in and of itself is not reforming the system. Okay.
Judges can also have the power to implement reforms without any need for legislation.
So judicial discretion. Yes. Okay. Right. The ability of a judge to deliberate over the merits of a case or the facts of a case, if it's the judge's purview to set sentencing or punishment or otherwise. Yes. Judges have had that power since, and correct me, but since fucking Magna Carta, for God's sake. So what are you talking about?
Close to 500,000 people are sitting behind bars right now, awaiting trial. And many of them are locked up because they are too poor to afford money bail.
Okay. I will not argue that the bail system, in some circumstances, is unfair. You know, having the ability to buy your way out of incarceration prior to trial, I don't have an answer. I don't have some grand declaration of morality on the situation. I don't think it's a one and done sort of solution. There should be no bail whatsoever. I'm not sure what a better system should be when it comes to things like that, but I do agree that holding someone in jail away from their family or opportunities to continue working or anything else because they're too poor to afford their freedom, I can get on the side of that argument depending on the circumstances. But I don't claim to be some genius who knows a better way. Okay, that being said.
The detention of people who cannot afford bail costs taxpayers every year $12 billion. And keep in mind,
wait, taxpayers nationwide $12 billion? I mean, sure, if you could reduce that in some fashion, great. But otherwise, $12 billion on the national taxpayer? That's a drop in the bucket, dude.
This is pre-trial, which means no one has yet been convicted of a crime.
I get that.
To uphold the principles of due process and the concept of innocent until proven guilty, judges can adopt reforms to help change the situation.
Adopt reforms like, if the judges are bound by current law when it comes to money bail, they have discretion within those boundaries to set bail. What reforms are you talking about? Just not set bail, period? If you're not talking about a mandatory new law, if you're not saying all judges should act a particular way in a particular situation, and you're also saying you want to reform the criminal justice system without making new law or changing the law, then it's still judicial discretion, isn't it? Discretion, individual judicial discretion.
Instead of relying solely on cash as the determining factor about whether someone is released,
you're going to rely on cheese wheels and shoes and barter?
Judges should ask whether someone is a danger to the community or a serious flight risk, and then decide whether detention makes sense.
Okay, so prior to this moment, prior to the instant that this person is standing on the stage saying this, no judge at any point in American history has ever assessed someone's threat to the community or flight risk when deciding upon whether or not there should be bail, and if so, how much. That's never happened before. I've never seen an episode of Law and Order where those same arguments have ever come up by a defense attorney on a fictional show reflecting actual criminal justice. No judge has ever assessed those circumstances when setting bail. It's never happened. Oh gosh, this is a revelation, dude. Why has no one thought of this before? What are you talking about? This is the legal equivalent of sending out Hallmark card platitudes. Thank you, John Miller. I may be mistaken, but aren't there guidelines / laws on how heavy the punishment for the crime committed? There are, if we're talking about bail, the bail, I think, depends on the jurisdiction, depends on the severity of the crime or the circumstances thereof. The number of years that can be assessed for a incarceration is set minimum, maximum, etc., by the law and so on. And within those boundaries, most of the time, unless we're talking about mandatory minimums, etc., judges, juries, etc., have discretion over what to charge someone with or what to sentence someone for, etc. This already exists. This is part of our process. This is part of our system. Is it a perfect system? No. And no matter what system you name for me to replace it, it is also an imperfect system because no system is perfect. But everything this guy has talked about so far is a nothing burger suggestion because it already exists. This is almost worse than restorative justice because at least that is a novel concept. This guy has introduced nothing but things that already are occurring and just sort of vaguely saying, without saying it, that judges and prosecutors should always aim for the lowest common denominator of their discretion in order to decrease criminalization, which doesn't actually decriminalize what they're applying their discretion to. Okay.
As the Supreme Court has said, in our society, liberty is the norm, and detention prior to trial or without trial is the carefully limited exception.
Okay. Again, in spirit, I don't disagree, but okay.
Judges can play an important part to restore the presumption of liberty in the criminal justice system.
They can play. Judges are integral to our criminal justice system. You just named off the Supreme Court, which is made up of what? Judges. They can play? Holy cats.
You know, all these changes are crucial to reforming the law.
What changes? You haven't said any changes. You've listed off things that already exist. And your entire present is right there on the screen. It's right there on the screen. How to reform the criminal justice system without ever changing the law. What changes are you talking about?
But they don't require waiting until a law is passed. But there, you know what? There's another more vital aspect to reform that could have more impact than anything else I've mentioned tonight.
Please tell me.
And that's the need to change how culture views the criminal justice system. When I was in law school, I learned how prosecutors were supposed to lock people up. I memorized the rules of evidence, cross-examination techniques, and the best way to secure a conviction. But I didn't learn what happened to people once they were sent behind bars.
You didn't? Okay, well, here, I'll give you a quick education. A dramatic education. Watch any documentary about life in prison. I mean, for the melodramatic version, watch The Shawshank Redemption. You had no idea what happens in prison? Did you ever watch TV? Did you ever read a book or see a movie? What are you talking about? Come on, you were a lawyer and you had no idea what goes on in prisons. Even like I say, a mass media notion. I think you would have an idea of what goes on simply by being alive.
Happened to people once they were sent behind bars. It was easy to focus on the immediate and not the downstream effects of our actions.
Okay.
And I think that this view of the criminal justice system is similar for many in our culture.
What are the downstream effects? Are you just going to wave your hand and say that there are, and you're not going to tell us what they are? What are they?
It's easy to think that as we lock people up, our communities are safer and justice has been served.
If you're talking about a serial rapist, I think I would agree. If you're talking about a serial murderer or fraudster or thief, I think I would agree. But again, you haven't set some kind of line of demarcation between what crimes you're talking about and what crimes you're not. So, okay.
But that's not always the case.
It's not always the case. So set a line.
Because every single year, 650,000 people will be released back into our neighborhoods and back into our communities.
Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
And we have to ask ourselves, are we preparing people to be returning as productive citizens, keeping the community safe, or are we setting them up for failure?
Okay. Again, that is not a bad question. That is not inherently a bad question and not a irrelevant concern. So like I said at the beginning of this, at least in spirit, I agree with that concern. How that concern is addressed and how effective that solution is, you'll have to show me specifics. But in the abstract, if someone has served their time, if they've paid their debt to society as we've established it, that should not inherently and permanently scar that person from being able to thereafter live a productive, peaceful life. I agree with that.
And time and time and time again, many people who come out of prison can't get a driver's license, can't get a loan, can't start a business, or obtain a professional license.
Again, it comes down to the individual circumstances of the person being released and so on. But in spirit, on principle, I do not disagree that someone who has served their time, paid their price for the crime they've committed, so long as they don't, start reoffending or anything, that shouldn't be a complete and total end to their ability to earn a living or to become a productive member of society. You got me.
All because our culture has demanded not just that the people who have committed an offense serve time in prison, but that they be relegated to second-class status for the rest of their lives.
Again, it depends on the circumstances. If someone has a particular series or pattern of behavior on their record legally, it's not unreasonable for a potential employer to know that. I mean, if someone has a history of theft, let's say, a potential employer should not be somehow prevented from knowing that fact about who they're hiring and bringing into their trust. It's one of those things where, I don't think necessarily you should be held to account forever for something you did in the past and have thereafter not reoffended. But it is also the right of someone who's going to take you into their trust, into their safety, into their confidence, to have an idea if you have a criminal record. And it might seem unfair. It might seem like everything's lined up against you. I'm not saying it's inherently always fair and just, but the rights of the individual who's been the offender doesn't somehow supersede the rights of the person that has to assess them for opportunities going forward. It's a shitty balance. And this is why, and I know this sounds like absolute condescension, but this is why you shouldn't commit crimes.
No law, no crime, and no policy will ever change until society demands it.
You said that this entire process did not require a change in law.
Politics is downstream of culture. And if we're concerned about the laws in the books, then we need to examine the judgment in our hearts. Criminal wrongdoing demands accountability.
Yes.
But it must be paired with mercy.
Yes.
And the hope for a second chance.
Sure. And again, those are all noble, idealistic notions, right? But at the end of the day, it comes down to the specificity of the situation at hand, the facts of the crime in question, and so on. You cannot make just blanket statements that everything needs to be reduced down to its absolute minimum because you don't like the numbers. You have to get more specific. If you're a lawyer, you understand that the devil is in the details. You can't stand up on a stage and just swing your hand and say that crime needs to be reassessed, while your only specific examples are the most petty and perhaps antiquated of just citations in various states or situations. I mean, come on, man.
None of us would want to ever be judged forever by our worst day.
Yes, that is true. You can say a complete and absolute truism to an audience and you're not going to get any disagreement. But we're not talking about broad level stuff. It comes down to the specifics. It comes down to the law. The laws you say don't need to change. And yet everything you've been talking about is laws that you think need to change.
So redemption must go hand in hand with our laws.
No. Redemption is up to the individual. The laws cannot create redemption. What are you talking about? A judge can show mercy. A jury can show mercy. The law can allow for the discretion of either or both to provide someone a more lenient outcome to their punishment versus another outcome. But redemption, that is on the shoulders of the individual and no one else.
So what are some practical steps we can take right now to help change culture without ever changing the law?
Okay, well, I've been waiting 15 minutes to hear it, plus everything else that's gone on since. Tell me.
Pay attention to when politicians argue for new crimes.
It's arguing for new laws, not for new crimes.
It's helpful to let them know that not everyone in the public agrees that moral law should be added to the books.
Just as a blanket statement? This guy's nothing but blanket statements.
If you own a business, consider hiring someone with a criminal record. They need a job to stay on a good path and very often end up becoming the best worker in the company.
Very often? I'm not saying you shouldn't hire people who have a criminal history. Just flat out. Never do it. But no one should be required to not use their own discretion depending on the circumstances. You're going back to individual choice, individual discretion. Yeah, we don't have to change the laws so long as people can have the option to make a decision. Great.
Visit someone in prison.
Why?
Being incarcerated strips away a person's sense of humanity and self-worth.
Okay.
Remind them there is hope and forgiveness.
Just randomly visit someone in prison? Okay.
And for those who are coming out of prison, you can help by assisting with a job search, providing transportation, and giving your time to help make reentry a success.
Okay.
All these things can transform the criminal justice system, but it can also transform you.
Okay, I just want to reiterate, the word transform necessitates change. But he doesn't want to change the laws, but he wants the criminal justice system to transform while relying on the discretion of people within or peripherally associated with the criminal justice system to make decisions within the bounds of their own discretion or the discretion provided to them by the criminal justice system. Thank you, point curation. Someone can redeem someone else. That's part of the idea of Christianity. But society doesn't redeem individuals. Individuals redeem society, or ought to. I tell you, that is a philosophical rabbit hole. But yeah, the law does not redeem someone. I mean, the law may exonerate someone if they're, wrongly convicted or something. And there's no redemption required other than hopefully their name and their reputation. But ultimately, redemption for bad actions taken, that's on the part of the perpetrator. The law can't redeem you. It can punish you. It can restrict you from certain rights for a certain time in order to try to pay your debt back to society at large or to penalize you and disincentivize you from repeating such behavior. But redemption, that's between you and whomever you harmed. And maybe that's where restorative justice comes in. Not as a replacement for the criminal justice system, but maybe an adjunct at best, maybe.
By being an active participant in growing positive culture, you will make an invaluable contribution to someone else's life as well as your own.
I'm contributing to positive culture by not committing crimes. I don't bother anybody. Anybody that doesn't bother me, I don't have any reason to bother them. That's my contribution.
It's easy to leave all the issues with the legislature and hope that'll solve our problems. And some of them might.
How many is some? I know, I'm being a nitpicker.
But sometimes changing hearts and minds will do infinitely better than changing a law. And if you take a closer look at how the criminal justice system really operates, you can find endless ways to find reforming the system without ever changing the law.
Okay, we're almost done.
And I think if you choose this route, you might be surprised at how effective you can be. Thank you.
So rather than changing the law, you are hoping that the Let me try that again. You are hoping that the better angels of our nature will override the vast and distant limits of the law and bring judges and prosecutors and juries to the most minimum possibility of their discretion. You don't want to change the law. You just want to convince people to not, exercise the full limits of the law as often as they do. Without telling us how often that happens, without telling us how often these outlier laws you brought up actually are enforced or people actually are jailed for and so on. You don't want to change the law. You just want to have a hopeful notion that everybody will be merciful by default. That they won't follow the law, that they'll operate in strict defiance of the limits of the law. Is that, in my slightly toasted stupor, is that what you understood, chat? That's what I took from this. And I'll say I'm surprised. I didn't hear anything about restorative justice. I thought maybe that'd come in there somewhere. It didn't. So, all right. Thank you, Chicago Mike Scribe. I definitely needed a drink and a cigar for this one. Boy, oh boy. I think I did too. But anyway, guys, it's your time now. I'll give a few minutes before I wrap this up to your comments, your questions, your observations. I will try to read them coherently, even though I'm obviously a little... I might be 2 sheets to the wind. Maybe not 3 quite yet, but scroll up a bit. Let's see. Faith Alexandria Oglesby. That is an amazing name. If murdering is your worst day, then you have Botvo and lie sealed your fate. I don't know what that was supposed to say, but you have haunted yourself with that stain. Sure. If you're released from prison after committing murder, either you feel remorse or you don't. And should you be judged on your worst day? Taking someone else's life? I guess it depends on the circumstances. I don't know. But yeah. If you've taken someone else's life, you've kind of given up. Taking someone else's life unjustly, I should say. Self-defense and so on, totally different game. But that's what the courts are there for, to decide those things. Dark Alile, for a bit, it sounded like he was advocating for privatizing lawmaking. I don't know, like taking the law discretion out of the hands of legislators or something, or like lobbyists like him should tell I mean, they do tell the legislators what to do, but you know what I mean. Spittle Buggy, Scribelight, do you think he's just another tool in the toolbox of justice reformers? I think he's an idealist. I think he's someone who has been steeped in witnessing or parsing through the misery of others. I think he has honestly seen some legitimate injustices that have come about from our justice system. But is maybe trying to find the path of least resistance towards making change against those things that he sees are wrong or flawed or unjust. I don't think he's a bad person. Right? I want to make this clear. I don't think he's a bad person or something, or advocating for something that's inherently nefarious. I think he's got a scattershot notion of a hopeful wish for, like I said, the better angels of our nature, as juries, as judges, as prosecutors, as a society. And I don't fault him for that. But in practical terms, he offered nothing substantive, Irate Bear, that I think is going to spur anyone to do anything beyond what they're already doing. Prosecutors have always had prosecutorial discretion over who to indict, when to indict for what. We just saw it in the last 48 hours with the George Floyd case. The police officer who has been arrested in the death of George Floyd was charged with third-degree murder. Now, from my layman's observations, I would say they could probably successfully argue second-degree murder. But, as Monkey argued last night on Lords of the Night, and I don't disagree with that assessment or the assessment of others, is that at least charging third-degree murder, given the prerequisites for proving that, it's a far lower bar to have to jump to get that guy convicted for that crime versus the necessary prerequisites for second-degree murder. And so if the intent is to hold this guy accountable and to lessen the likelihood that he'll be acquitted, then third-degree murder isn't necessarily a bad option. But third-degree murder was only used because of prosecutorial discretion. Now, you can agree with that decision or not, and, I wouldn't blame you if you did. But it's not like some rare animal that is never enacted or never let loose. Prosecutorial discretion, judicial discretion, the discretion of juries to convict or to acquit, these have been part and parcel of our process, for better or worse, case by case, since the beginning. So he wasn't arguing for anything new. He was just sort of crossing his fingers and hoping that people will make more lenient decisions, I guess. Graph Spree, Scribelight, did you hear about the media trying to cause fear when Russian jets chased away American jets near the Russian border? If I did hear about that, I don't remember. How long ago was this? So, no. I mean, if it's recent, I can see how I'd miss it with the current news cycle. Sar Jim, are there still lockdowns in your location? For stay at home? Yes. Yep. I'm not going anywhere or have anywhere to go for the time being. But like I've said before, and I want to reiterate, I am very fortunate. Fortunately, my job and my company can operate remotely. As much as I might, complain about being on call all the time or the difficulties thereof, I'm not complaining about the fact that I have the opportunity to complain about those things. If my biggest gripe right now is I'd really like to get a haircut, I'm doing okay. So I know I said that last night on the show. I just want to reiterate that. I gripe about work, and sometimes it is frustrating, and I never really get a day off lately. But anyway, that's an aside. Let's see. Anything else you guys want to say? Let me scroll up here a little bit. Let's see. Dark Alile. In my province, it is just as easy to keep my ID as a driver's license as to switch it to a basic ID. Same location to get, just costs a little more, and it keeps my driver's status for work if needed. Well, since you said province, I'm assuming that you're, and if I've forgotten this, Dark Alile, I apologize. I'm assuming you're not a Yankee, as it were. And I don't know all the ins and outs of IDs. I have a driver's license. I don't own a car. It's a long story. I think I've described it before, but it took me a long time to get my driver's license. It was one of those things that I said, that's one of the last check boxes on a list to say that I'm at least a functional adult in this society. So I bit the bullet, as it were, took 2 weeks off from work, did nothing but take driver's lessons, passed my driver's test, got my driver's license, just to get that off the plate. Let's see. John Miller, just heard some great news. My cousin's daughter was just born this morning. Oh, congratulations. Oh, that's great. Yay, baby. All the best to your cousin and the newborn. Congratulations, John Miller. I'm always happy when there's a new baby born. And speaking of which, Squeedus's birthday is coming up in a couple months, in August. Can't believe it's almost been a year. But now I'm just trailing off into irrelevancies as related to the video. So guys, in my slightly inebriated state, I'm going to wrap this up here. Did we learn anything? Maybe. I don't know. The idealism of someone who wants to see reform, but knows that reform is a slow process, so wants to bet on the mercy of individuals versus changing law. I mean, if you want to argue, I would like to see people err on the side of leniency within the discretion they currently possess as prosecutors and judges and so on, as often as they can. I mean, depending on the circumstances of the case in front of them, I wouldn't fault them for it, unless they decide to let a rapist go, or someone who was holding a bloody knife and there was a severed head in their back room, and just say, they've got $5 bail. Again, it comes down to a case-by-case situation. It comes down to an individual circumstances being assessed by whoever it is in the process of the criminal justice system. Do I have a problem with mercy? Do I have a problem with forgiveness? Inherently, no. As long as it's deserved, as long as it's earned. But that comes down to the individual. That comes down to the circumstances at hand. So, anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this mystery box tour. I didn't know where this was going to take us, but here we are. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your attendance. And thank you so much for your generosity, especially in these insane times we find ourselves in, between disease and civil unrest, if you want to call it that, and so on and so forth. What a time to be alive. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a science fiction novel, walking around seeing people with face masks on, and am I living in an alternate timeline? But these little excursions into pseudo-intellectual or societal argumentation from TEDx do help alleviate the pressure a little bit. And I so much hope that it does for you as well. Anyway, before I completely bumble any more speech, thank you so much for joining me. Please be safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And look for me tonight if you'd like to hear more from me. If you'd like to hear from me, if you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me tonight on Ranting Monkeys channel at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for Lords of the Night. I'm going to go let this pepper jack wear off a bit. Everybody have a good rest of your Saturday. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.